Most of the time, our driving goes smoothly. But despite our best attempts to predict the actions of every other road user and do everything right on our end, emergencies can still happen. Some emergencies you may experience are flat tires, hydroplaning, driving off the road's edge, or engine trouble. These emergencies tend to fall into a couple of categories: traction-related or vehicle failure-related emergencies. At some point, you may have to use emergency avoidance skills to address these situations. First, let's look at a potentially very risky situation. Your tires drop off the side of the roadway. At some point, your vehicle may drift off the roadway onto the shoulder, or you may steer into the shoulder, or you may steer onto the shoulder to avoid a collision. This situation is risky, as many factors could easily cause a vehicle to roll over. Some common mistakes drivers make are freezing or panicking, turning the steering wheel too fast toward the road, or turning the wheel too much, and pointing your vehicle at oncoming traffic. Less common mistakes but still risky is turning the wheel too slowly back to the road, or not turning the steering wheel enough and running into a guardrail or a pole. In the past, drivers were advised to steer back onto the road in this situation, but returning to the roadway is a bit more complicated than that. The biggest risk in this situation is panicking and trying to steer back onto the road too fast. Too many drivers immediately jerk the steering wheel back to the road. Often, this does move them back onto the pavement, but now they are headed toward the edge of the road on the other side without having time to respond and anticipate requiring additional steering to stop the vehicle's sideways movement and get it back on track. Even the most skilled drivers may face challenging and life-threatening situations. The key is to always be prepared for emergencies, even unexpected ones. In order to minimize injuries and damage, knowing how to respond to the unexpected can make all the difference. This module covers dealing with emergencies that drivers can experience, including risky situations where a vehicle loses traction on the roadway. Other situations addressed include mechanical failures such as brake failure and unintended acceleration, and adverse weather conditions such as rain or fog. If you are fully prepared to deal with these situations, even before they can occur, once you are in the middle of them, you will be ready to take any action you need to avoid a collision. As discussed, one risky situation is when your vehicle's tires move off the pavement. The car may have been forced off the road, or the driver may not have been paying attention. Driving off the road's edge, even with just one side of the vehicle, can be risky because it can easily lead to a rollover crash. If you are in this situation, remain calm and keep the steering wheel straight, even if you are half on and half off the pavement. Secondly, gently ease off the accelerator. You want to start slowing down without upsetting the vehicle's balance. Third, unless something is directly in your path ahead, do not try to steer back onto the roadway until your speed is lower. Let the car slow as much as possible before returning to the road. Lastly, check for traffic behind, signal, and turn back onto the road. The most common mistake is panicking and trying to get back on the road too fast, or edging gradually back and having the tires catch the edge of the pavement. The result can be disastrous. There is also no guarantee that the roadside will be clear of objects. You will likely find road signs, poles, guardrails, bridge abutments, and debris. When you find your right side wheels are off the edge of the road, but something is blocking your way, it is time to execute evasive maneuvers. Coast to lower your speed for as long as you can. Turn the steering wheel firmly to the left. As soon as you feel the front tire contact the road edge, steer quickly back to the right past the straight ahead position. This will help prevent you from moving too far back onto the roadway, keeping you in the nearest lane. Then, turn the wheel quickly back to the straight ahead position. This way, you can fine-tune your vehicle position. Perform any additional corrective steering needed. Anytime one or more of your vehicles are off the edge of the roadway is very risky. This situation must be considered extremely dangerous, and how you respond will make the difference between crashing or moving smoothly back onto the road. Another traction-related and often scary situation is when your tires lose traction and your vehicle goes into a skid. It is possible that any driver could lose traction on the road surface and experience a skid. Driving into a corner too fast, steering aggressively when attempting to return to the roadway after driving off the roadway, driving too fast on surfaces made slick by rain, ice, or snow, and even using evasive maneuvers to avoid colliding with another vehicle or a fixed object can cause a driver to lose traction and into a skid. We were all taught to steer into or toward a skid. This advice can be useful, depending on what type of skid you are experiencing. But here's some new advice. Continue to look and steer wherever you want to go. This reflects an increased recognition of the importance of where a driver is looking. People tend to drive where they are looking. When drivers look at a specific target, the brain causes their hands and feet to somewhat automatically do what they need to keep heading toward that target. Let's look closer at skids and how we can reduce our risks when they happen. Despite our best efforts, we may lose traction. Sometimes there's no way to avoid it. You find yourself in a skid. Most skids come from braking too hard, usually on a slippery surface. Sometimes it happens because you turn too quickly, or it can happen when you accelerate too rapidly. There are two types of skids, a front wheel or understeer skid, and a rear wheel oversteer skid. In a front wheel or understeer skid, your vehicle will continue straight even though you try to make a turn. You have turned the wheels, but the vehicle is not responding to your steering because the front tires have lost traction with the pavement. Understeer skids are the easiest to correct and least dangerous. In a rear wheel skid or oversteer skid, the rear wheels of your vehicle break traction and slide out from under you towards the outside of the turn. The vehicle is turning more than you have steered. In any skid, the most important thing you can do is continue looking and steering where you want to go. The next most important thing you can do is to avoid slamming on the brakes. Hitting the brakes is a driver's most typical response in any emergency situation, but in a skidding situation, slamming on the brakes will only further upset the vehicle balance and make it hard for you to regain control, which is the goal. Instead, continue looking and steering where you want to go while slightly easing up on the accelerator. Be ready to turn the steering wheel back in the opposite direction to prevent the vehicle from skidding in the other direction. You may have to repeatedly turn the wheel to line up with the road before you regain complete control. The best way to handle skids is to prevent them, but knowing what to do will help, particularly if you mentally rehearse by frequently running through the steps in your mind. Generally, it is easier to recover from an understeer skid. The driver must lift off the accelerator or brake a bit. This will help shift more weight forward, helping to press the front tires down into the pavement, increasing traction and helping regain control. Oversteer skids are more difficult to recover from. The driver must make corrective steering movements and be accurate in timing and amount. Turning too little too late can make the skid even worse. But continue looking and steering where you want to go while slightly easing up on the accelerator. The most effective strategy for preventing a skid is driving at speed slow enough for conditions and always maintaining traction. And be as smooth as you can with your steering and pedal inputs, even in an emergency. We never want to demand more traction from our tires than they can provide. And if you get into a skid, remember to continue to look and steer where you want to go. Two factors that play into skids are inertia and gravity. Inertia is Newton's first law of motion, which states that an object in motion moves straight ahead until some outside force acts upon it. This force creates problems when a driver suddenly attempts to change a vehicle's direction. As a car travels around a corner, inertia keeps the car moving forward in a straight line rather than allowing the car to follow the curve or turn. Factors that influence the effect of inertia include the sharpness of the turn or curve, speed, size, height, weight, and load of the vehicle, roadway slope, and roadway surface. Gravity is another factor that plays into skids. Gravity is the invisible force that keeps our feet on the ground. It also affects vehicle traction and performance. Gravity's downhill pull affects a vehicle's ability to accelerate and maintain speeds on hills. When going uphill, you must accelerate to maintain a constant speed and overcome the force of gravity. On a slippery hill, acceleration may result in a loss of traction, potentially causing an oversteer skid. Conversely, gravity boosts speed when you drive downhill, increasing the stopping distance and potentially causing an understeer skid. But the best way to address skids is to continually adjust your speed to the local driving conditions, thereby preventing a skid in the first place. Of course, there are many more possible emergencies that drivers could experience, including emergencies caused by mechanical failure. Mechanical emergency situations include engine stops, light failure, tire blowouts, or unintended acceleration. Sometimes emergency solutions are straightforward, but other situations require more effort and skill. Let's look at mechanical failures and some techniques for addressing them. Although most modern cars are very reliable, things can still go wrong with your vehicle. Engines can have problems, lights can go out, tires can go flat, and brakes can fail. But if you are ready to deal with these types of events when they happen, you will lower your risk and decrease the time you are without a vehicle. Engines are machines, and sometimes machines don't operate correctly. It could be dangerous if your engine stops providing power or shuts down altogether while driving. If your engine begins to miss or stall, shifting to neutral can help keep the momentum. If this occurs, check for nearby traffic, signal, and safely steer to the shoulder of the road to a protected position. It is important to know that when you lose engine power, you also lose your power for steering and braking. They'll both still work, but you must use more force to turn or brake. Another mechanical emergency is a blowout. Many things can cause a blowout while driving. Low tire pressure, debris on the road, worn tires, and potholes, to name a few. The first thing is recognizing that you have had a blowout. It doesn't really matter which tire is blown, the way to handle it is the same. First, stay off the brakes. In this case, it could cause a skid, doubling your emergency, so you have to stay off the brake. Instead, look ahead, hold the steering wheel tightly, and concentrate on keeping the car in the middle of our lane. Next, gradually take your foot off the accelerator. Let the car roll to a near stop at a safe place on the side of the road, and then apply the brakes gently as needed. Once you have the vehicle under control, it is a good idea to turn on your emergency flashers, making yourself visible and alert other drivers of your situation. Humans can't see well at night, so we need headlights. But what do you do if your headlights go out entirely? There is no sure cure, but one of these might work. First, try the dimmer switch. Your high beams and low beams are on different circuits. One might work when the other does not. If that does not work, turn on your emergency flashers. They should help you see well enough to find a safe spot to pull off the roadway. Do not drive at night again until you get your headlights working. It is best to get this repaired right away. Here is a scene for another emergency. You are on a highway exit ramp and need to slow down. You press on the brake pedal, then a bit more, and you realize something is terribly wrong. Brake failure. How should you handle this emergency? The first thing is to try again to regain some braking power. First, rapidly pump the brake pedal several times. This may build up enough brake pressure to slow or stop the car. Next, downshift to a lower gear. It will not stop you, but it might slow you down. Next, try the parking brake. You can operate it with your hand if mounted next to the seat. Remember to press and hold the release button simultaneously. If you do not, your wheel may lock and you could go into a skid. If your parking brake is mounted on the floor, pull and hold the brake release lever simultaneously so you can fully control the brake. If these maneuvers don't help, you must find an open space to move your vehicle safely. If there is one, the shoulder is your best bet. If there isn't, look for any open area, a field or even someone's front lawn. If a curb exists, try steering so your wheels drag alongside it, but it can help bring you to a stop. It may be impossible to avoid hitting something. If that's the case, try for something soft that will give way when you contact it. Once you bring your car to a stop, leave it where it is. Do not drive if you suspect your vehicle has a problem. Instead, call your auto club for assistance. You should have your brakes checked annually or at your manufacturer's recommended intervals. Although driving emergencies are rare, it is wise to be as prepared as possible to deal with any challenges that come your way. Preparing mentally by going through the steps we discussed will help you in an emergency. Next, let's discuss adverse conditions. It would be nice to drive in dry conditions during the day, but most drivers find themselves in some more challenging conditions at least occasionally. Returning to the importance of vision, being able to see clearly is critical to remaining safe on today's roads. Let's look into reducing our risk by increasing what we see. While driving in clear conditions can be challenging, driving in the rain can be even more difficult with reduced visibility. Keeping your windshield wipers fresh can help, but the elements sometimes make it hard to see. That's why it is important you allow more space around your vehicle in wet conditions. The extra space gives you additional time to execute evasive maneuvers if needed. To help maintain enough space in any adverse visual conditions, follow the sight distance rule, which says that you must be able to stop in the distance you can see. With reduced visibility, that distance could be as close as a few car lengths. That means that you should be going slowly enough that if something enters your path, you can stop. As your sight distance becomes shorter, your following distance should become longer. This is also a good time to maintain space to the side by avoiding driving in a pack of cars. That way, if you run into trouble, braking is not your only option. You can also move into an open space. Having much space around your vehicle is good at any time, but it is especially helpful when visibility is poor and traction is reduced. Fog is another troublesome challenge to visibility. When you drive through fog, light is reflected from the water droplets back into your eyes, making it harder to see ahead. The problem is that although you might be able to see the pavement directly in front of your car, you won't see anything up ahead on the road, such as other vehicles. That is why adjusting your speed downward for the reduced visibility caused by the fog is so important. It may be tempting to use high beams, but it is actually better to use low beams in fog. With high beams, the fog reflects even more light back into your eyes. And the better your vision, the better you will be able to make a good choice regarding your speed. Remember to slow down in the fog. It will give you more time to respond to anything that suddenly appears in your path to travel. Driving slower in adverse conditions offers two benefits. First, driving slowly gives you more time and space to make any evasive maneuver to avoid a collision. In adverse conditions, space can be your best friend. Secondly, slower speeds will afford your tires additional traction, which can be critical when executing a quick steering or braking maneuver. Often, the best course of action is to avoid driving in adverse conditions, but that is not always possible. So, making good space, speed, and visibility decisions can help tremendously lower your risks. It's good to remember that your skills in adverse conditions might be quite high, but the skills of the drivers nearby might not be as good. During this course, we have discussed many ways to reduce your risk out on the road. But what happens if something goes completely wrong and you have a collision? What then? On average, each driver in the US experiences some collision about every 10 years. So any of us could still experience a collision despite all our experience and active efforts to reduce conflict and overall risk on the road. If you have been in an accident, you may have received a traffic ticket or been issued a citation. Your insurance rates may have increased, your vehicle could have been damaged, or you may have sustained injuries. You could have also caused injuries to occupants in the other vehicle or even in your own. Looking back, what might you have been able to do to reduce the chance of it happening? Even if the crash was caused by someone else. Even the most skillful and experienced drivers can become involved in a crash, but doing the right thing on time can minimize injuries and maybe even save a life. all drivers should know what to do if they become involved in a crash. They must also be prepared to assume legal and financial responsibility for a crash. As a driver and owner of a motor vehicle, you are liable for actions that cause injury or damage to other people or their property. Being prepared can decrease and even prevent legal difficulties. Remembering your duties at the collision scene is as easy as ABC. A. Assist the injured. After stopping, your first duty is to check for injured people and call 911 quickly. If you are certified to render first aid, do so to address blocked breathing, shock, and severe bleeding. If not certified, make the injured comfortable while waiting for emergency medical services. Avoid moving them unless there is risk of another collision. B. Be visible. It is critical now to control the scene, which means making sure the scene is visible to approaching drivers. If possible, move vehicles out of the traffic path and use hazard flashers, flares, and reflective triangles to warn any approaching drivers, even in daylight. Flares should be positioned 100, 200, and 300 feet behind the vehicle, giving approaching drivers time to react. These tips also hold when only your vehicle is disabled at the roadside. Be sure to position everyone involved far away from vehicles still on or along the road. C. Communicate. If your call to 911 did not summon the police, you may need to contact them directly. They will prepare any needed reports containing details about the collision, which may be needed later for insurance and other purposes. By law, you must notify police immediately when your vehicle is involved in a collision resulting in personal injury, death, or property damage over a certain amount. It is a good idea even when injuries and damage are not apparent. To notify authorities to trigger an investigation. An official report may well come in handy later. It is also important to recognize the efforts and risks taken by the first responders summoned to crash scenes. They have a tough job and are affected by crashes. They must show up at the worst events imaginable. They deserve our thanks and our appreciation. To summarize, loss of traction, mechanical failures, adverse conditions, and human error can create emergencies. The thing about emergencies is that they happen suddenly, leaving little time for decision making and making avoidance maneuvers. That is why emergencies often result in an incorrect panic response or sometimes no response. Correct responses to most emergencies can be learned by thinking through possible situations and mentally rehearsing appropriate responses. Practicing what-if responses to simulated emergency situations under safe conditions can increase your chances of making good decisions and successful avoidance maneuvers. Drivers who know what to do in emergencies are likelier to stay in control when the unexpected happens. The key point is that the unexpected does happen. That is why it is so important to minimize the consequences of collisions. By properly using the safety equipment on your vehicle, ensuring your passengers are buckled up, locking your doors to help prevent being ejected, being constantly alert to the environment, and remaining focused on driving.